The gavel cracked, and the room jolted as if the wood itself screamed. And Judge Walsh said, "Order." Lila Hart felt her ribs cinch like a belt, and she swallowed fire. A juror flinched, and a paper cup toppled, coffee racing across tile. Tessa Monroe's pen froze mid-loop, and she stared like the truth had flashed a siren. The witness shook and whispered, "I lied," and the gallery inhaled like a single lung. Victor Brandt said, "Strike," that while his smile cut the air like wire. Sam Kincaid touched Lila's sleeve and said, "Breathe." But her breath refused to obey. The judge's eyes hardened, and the seal above the bench looked heavier than law. Lila said, "They buried what clears me," and the words tasted like iron. The clerk fumbled pages, and each sheet rasped like snakeskin. Owen Pike gripped the armrest as if it might keep him from drowning. The bailiff moved 2 steps, slow as thunder, and the rant of whispers swelled. Lila felt the verdict crawling toward her like cold daylight. She said, "I did not do this," and the room held its breath like a fist. The doors sighed and the hallway swallowed the courtroom's thunder as Lila walked beside Sam, and he said, "Do not let that whisper define you." Rain smeared the glass, and Victor passed with a nod that felt like a threat wrapped in silk. Tessa hovered with questions burning, and she said, "One quote," but Sam's stare clipped the request clean. Lila felt the floor tilt, and her pulse counted down like a bomb. Judge Walsh's words rattled in memory, and the seal pressed against her spine like a brand. Lila said, "They know something is missing," and Sam said, "Then we find why." A bailiff shut the door, and the hush rang like a bell. Every light flickered, as if justice were a loose wire. Lila pressed her palm to the cool wall and said, "I will not drown." Sam said, "Then breathe here, not back there." She inhaled the scent of wet wool and old paint. She tasted copper resolve and said, "I am not their story." The stairwell caught echoes like coins, and Lila paused on the landing as Tessa said, "The city is already feeding on this." Sam said, "Let them chew air," but his eyes mapped exits like a general. A TV cart in a lobby corner bled headlines, and Victor's clip played on loop. Victor said, "We will prove the truth," and the word truth felt rented. Lila said, "They stole the piece that clears me," and Tessa whispered, "Then someone wants you buried." The elevator chimed and emptied a small flood of eyes. A juror ghosted past like guilt with a badge. Sam said, "We lock down chain of custody by dusk." Lila counted the seconds between her breaths and the chime, and the rhythm steadied like rails. She said, "I will not fold for cameras." Tessa raised her mic and lowered it, and she said, "Not yet." In the records room, the air smelled like old dust and toner, and Lila said, "Where does the chain snap?" Sam flipped a ledger and said, "Between intake and locker 320. The clerk frowned, and the fluorescent buzz drilled the silence. Tessa waited at the threshold like an oath she might break. Lila touched a barcoded envelope sleeve and felt absence like a bruise. Victor's voice drifted from a far call, and he said, "No comment," with a smile she could hear. Sam said, "We ask for camera pulls and sign-in logs." The clerk said, "The camera was under maintenance," and the words tasted like rust. Lila said, "Convenient," and the ledger pages rasped like dry leaves. She felt her chest unlock with anger's key. Sam said, "Anger is fuel, not a verdict." Lila nodded and said, "Then let us burn clean." They reached the courthouse steps where the rain had thinned to silver threads, and Lila said, "If they cut the feed, they cut it for a reason." Sam said, "Then the reason has a name." Tessa said, "You will be tried twice, once in here and once out there." Lila looked at the cameras stacked like hungry crows. Victor exited beneath an umbrella, and he said no questions, but the lenses followed him as if he were a beacon. Lila said, "They want me to beg," and the words tasted like dust. Sam said, "We do not beg." The rain cooled her temper into steel. She said, "I want the sign-in sheet, every copy." Tessa said, "I will dig." "But I am not your friend." And Lila said, "I do not need a friend. I need a light." The city breathed wet and watchful. The courtroom's air turned dense as Detective Mara Keene took the stand, and Lila felt her throat lock. Mara, 46, female, smoothed her blazer and said, "Chain of custody remained intact." Sam Kincaid leaned forward, voice sharp, then explained the missing envelope. Mara's hand twitched on the railing and she said, "Records may have been misfiled." Victor Brandt's smile flared like steel, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, mistakes do not equal conspiracy." Lila whispered, "They erased me," and her pulse hammered. Owen Pike, the juror, blinked too long, his gaze skating away. Tessa scribbled furiously, the ink bleeding into jagged strokes. The judge rapped once, and the room hushed like a sealed vault. Mara's eyes flicked toward Victor, a glance too quick, and Sam caught it like a hook. Lila said, "That is not an accident," and the words stayed suspended, heavy as chains. The gavel seemed ready to fall again, but silence dragged every second longer than a breath. The recess bell rang, and the corridor pulsed with murmurs as Mara Keene pressed her back to the wall. Lila stepped close, her voice low. "Who pushed you to lie?" Mara said, "No one," but her eyes flinched sideways. Sam loomed, calm but firm, and said, "We'll subpoena every second of your shifts." Victor strolled past, umbrella dripping, and he said, "Enjoy the guessing game." Tessa whispered, "She's cracking," scribbling faster than her breath. Mara clenched her folder, the corner cutting her palm, and she said, "I can't." Lila said, "Then you already did." The fluorescent hum bled over their shoulders. A bailiff swept by with heavy boots muttering, "Back in 5." The walls held every word like stone ears. Mara's silence screamed louder than denial, and Sam said, "The cracks always start small." Lila looked at her and thought, "Trust dies in glances." Back in session, the defense filed a motion in limine, and Sam said, "Exclude fabricated testimony." Victor rose, voice slick, "The jury deserves every fact." Judge Walsh lifted her glasses and said, "Argue relevance, not venom." Lila's chest burned as the clerk shuffled papers that sounded like blades. Victor leaned toward the bench, eyes slicing, and said, "Objection is simply a mask for fear." Sam shot back, "Fear's not evidence." The gallery rippled with low laughter, sharp and mean. Lila said, "This is theater, not truth," under her breath. The judge slammed her gavel, and silence buckled the noise flat. Owen Pike's stare drilled holes in the table, sweat pooling at his collar. Sam leaned toward Lila and whispered, "They want you rattled." She whispered back, "They cannot break me." But her fists said otherwise. The hallway darkened as rain lashed the high windows, and Mara Keene slipped into a corner. Caleb Voss, 40, male investigator, approached, trench coat dripping, and said, "They're pulling you both ways." Mara whispered, "I did not erase that file." Caleb leaned close, eyes hard, and said, "But you let them." Lila, pausing mid-step, caught only fragments, enough to taste betrayal. Sam tugged her arm, saying, "Not here." Tessa's recorder glowed red from the far end, catching secrets like sparks. Mara's voice cracked, "I never signed it out," and Caleb's silence said guilt lived in shadows. Lila whispered, "Every piece they touch rots," and Sam said, "Then we drag it back to light." The rain hammered harder, as if the city itself wanted to drown the truth. Caleb slipped away, and Mara's shoulders caved like walls collapsing. Evening bled over the courthouse steps, the rain thinning into mist. Lila stood with Sam, eyes scanning the shadows. She said, "Someone close is feeding him." Sam said, "Then the enemy is in our file room." Victor descended the stairs with press lights blazing, his grin a blade. He said, "Tomorrow we bury the lies," and the cameras snapped like fireworks. Tessa muttered, "That's front page," and shoved her recorder deeper into her coat. Mara lingered under the awning, gaze low, hands hidden. Caleb vanished into a cab, collar up, eyes unreadable. Lila whispered, "Every silence is a map, and Sam said, "Then we learned to read them." The crowd swelled, chanting names, their voices soaked with judgment. Lila pressed her hand to the wet rail and said, "Tomorrow, they will hear mine." The morning air in the courthouse pressed heavy as Lila Hart sat at the defense table, her chest tight with dread. She whispered, "They took it, Sam," and Sam Kincaid said, "Then they left fingerprints we will find." Victor Brandt smirked, tapping his pen against a folder that looked too clean. The clerk stumbled through evidence lists, his voice cracking. The missing envelope was read aloud, and the room stiffened. Judge Walsh's brows drew together like storm clouds, and she said, "Explain." Lila's pulse thundered, every beat screaming absence. Mara Keene stared at the floor, jaw locked, sweat slick at her temple. The jury leaned forward, sensing rot. Tessa scribbled until her pen tore the paper, her breath ragged. Lila said, "They are building a grave, not a case." Sam muttered, "Then we break the shovel." The silence after swallowed everything but her fear. The recess spilled chaos into the lobby as cameras flashed. Lila pressed against the marble wall, her breath jagged. Tessa Monroe said, "The city smells blood, Lila." Lila shot back, "Then they will choke on it." Sam scanned the crowd, shoulders stiff as stone. Victor swept past reporters, his voice booming, "The truth will outlast the lies." Lila's stomach twisted as the cameras turned from him to her. A juror slipped through the throng, Owen Pike keeping his head down, guilt etched into his stride. Caleb Voss, damp coat hanging, murmured to Mara Keene in a shadowed alcove. Lila caught it, too close, too secret. Sam said, "We are watching snakes shed skin." Tessa raised her recorder, hesitating, eyes flicking between them. Lila muttered, "Every silence is a confession," and pushed toward the stairwell before her resolve cracked in the glare. The evidence room smelled of rust and mildew as Lila trailed her hand along empty shelves. Sam flipped through a logbook, muttering, "Pages missing." The clerk stammered, "It must have been filed off-site." Lila said, "No, it was stolen." Her voice cracked like breaking glass. Caleb Voss stepped in, rain still dripping from his trench coat. He said, "Careful where you point that anger." Lila's eyes locked on him, sharp as glass. Sam said, "You know something." Caleb smirked, but his silence spoke guilt. Mara Keene lingered at the doorway, her knuckles white on the frame. Lila whispered, "It's all rotting inside out." The flickering fluorescent hummed overhead, cold and merciless. Sam closed the ledger and said, "If they want shadows, we drag them into the light." The room seemed to close tighter, air thick with secrets too heavy to breathe. The jury room leaked whispers when recess stretched longer than expected. Owen Pike sat rigid, staring at the clock. Another juror said, "It feels wrong," but his voice was a ghost. Owen muttered, "We can't fix broken evidence." His hands trembled as he gripped the table. Across the glass, reporters pressed like vultures, their cameras flashing even through frosted panes. Owen swallowed hard, remembering Victor's voice in the corridor. "Stay quiet and it stays easy." Sweat trickled down his collar, soaking into his tie. He whispered, "What if she is innocent?" But his words drowned under nervous laughter. Lila's face haunted him, eyes burning across memory like fire. The air grew hotter, every tick of the clock louder. He thought truth and lies were bleeding together. His silence stretched long enough to feel like betrayal. On the courthouse steps, dusk painted the sky in bruised purples. Lila said, "They want me erased before I can speak." Sam said, "Then speak louder." Reporters swarmed, microphones lunging like spears. Victor Brandt raised his hand and said, "Justice is at hand." The crowd cheered, blind to his shadow. Tessa Monroe pushed forward, recorder lifted, eyes locked on Lila. She said, "Tell me why the evidence vanished." Lila's throat burned, but she said, "Because someone fears the truth." Cameras snapped, her defiance caught in a strobe of light. Caleb Voss watched from the curb, face hidden beneath his collar. Mara keenly lingered nearby, pale, trembling as if every word cut her open. The city hummed with judgment, its breath heavy as rain. Lila whispered to herself, "They will not bury me alive." The words echoed louder than the chant of the crowd. The courtroom felt like a furnace as Victor Brandt called a surprise witness. The doors opened, and gasps cracked the silence when Elise Hart, Lila's estranged sister, stepped forward. Lila's pulse collapsed under the weight of betrayal. Elise, 36, female, said, "She asked me to hide things." The gallery erupted like wildfire, and Judge Walsh hammered for order. Sam's voice cut sharp. "This testimony was never disclosed." Victor smirked and said, "Truth arrives when it must." Lila whispered, "Not her, not now." Elise's gaze never met her sister's, shame flickering behind practiced calm. The jury leaned in, smelling blood. Tessa scribbled so fast her pen tore the paper. Sam said, "We will destroy this lie," but his eyes revealed the shock. The gavel slammed again, but the echo only deepened the fracture. In cross-examination, Sam's voice sharpened like broken glass. He said, "When did you last speak to your sister outside this courtroom?" Elise hesitated, her throat working against the silence. Lila muttered, "Tell the truth," under her breath. Victor leaned forward, enjoying every crack. Elise said, 2 months ago, but Sam pounced. "Our records show last week." Gasps rolled through the gallery. Judge Walsh said, "Answer with care, Ms. Hart." Elise's hands trembled, her nails biting into her palm. Lila stared at her, heart splitting between rage and sorrow. Tessa whispered, "Family blood is spilling," into her recorder. Owen Pike, in the jury box, looked away as if he had seen too much. Elise's lips quivered before she said, "I was told to say it." The hallway after recess buzzed like a hive. Lila pressed Elise against the wall, voice low but edged with fire. She said, "Who made you say it?" Elise's eyes shimmered with guilt. "He promised to protect me," she whispered. Sam blocked Victor's path as he passed, muttering, "You've sunk lower than law." Victor smirked and said, "Truth wears many suits." Mara Keene lingered nearby, eyes darting like a cornered fox. Caleb Voss watched from the stairwell shadows, lips tight around secrets. Tessa whispered into her mic, "This family fracture could split the verdict." Elise said, "I wanted out," tears threatening her composure. Lila's voice shook, "You chose them over me." The echo of betrayal clung to the corridor like smoke. Back in the courtroom, Mara Keene was recalled. Her voice trembled as she admitted, the evidence log was altered. Gasps crackled through the room. Sam seized the moment, by whose order? Mara's silence screamed louder than words. Victor stood objecting, speculation, but the jury leaned forward, hungry. Judge Walsh said, "Answer the question." Mara's eyes flicked toward Caleb in the gallery before she whispered, "I was told by someone inside." Lila's breath caught, realization piercing like glass. Sam muttered, "Now we see the cracks." Caleb's jaw clenched, but he did not move. Tessa whispered, "This is unraveling," her pen stabbing the page. The gavel slammed, but the truth was already bleeding into the room. As evening draped shadows across the courthouse steps, Lila stood with Sam at her side. She whispered, "It was Caleb, wasn't it?" Sam said, "The thread points to him." Tessa approached, voice sharp, "Will you go on record?" Lila's jaw tightened. "Not yet. The truth will speak inside." Victor exited into the rain, umbrella high, reporters swarming, his grin unbroken. Elise lingered in the doorway, guilt weighing her shoulders. Mara slipped away, vanishing into the storm. Caleb stood across the street, collar raised, watching like a phantom. Lila whispered, "If he touched that file, I will expose him." Sam said, "Then we sharpen the blade for tomorrow." The city lights flickered against wet pavement, as if mirroring the fracture of trust. The courtroom swelled with tension as Sam Kincaid rose for cross, his tone like a blade drawn. He said, Detective Keene, how many times did you sign logs without seeing evidence? Mara's hands shook, and she muttered, "Too many." Victor objected, voice booming, "Irrelevant." Judge Walsh silenced him with a glare, saying, "Answer directly." Mara's eyes darted to Caleb in the gallery before she whispered, "I was told to look away." Gasps rippled, and Lila's chest ached as if betrayal sat on her ribs. Sam said, "By whom?" Mara's silence dragged, the gallery holding breath like glass about to break. Elise sat in the back, face pale with shame. Tessa scribbled frantically, pen scratching like thunder. The gavel slammed, and Judge Walsh said, "Control your witness." Lila thought the truth was clawing its way free, but still wrapped in shadows. During recess, the hall echoed with the shuffle of restless feet. Lila cornered Sam, whispering, "She almost named him." Sam said, "Almost isn't enough." Caleb leaned against the far wall, his eyes sharp and unyielding. Victor strolled past, smirk carved like stone, saying, "You're chasing ghosts." Elise stepped closer to Lila, voice trembling. "He promised protection. I thought it was safety." Lila spat back, "And you gave him my noose." Tessa pushed forward with recorder in hand, asking, "Is Caleb Voss the name missing?" Sam blocked her, growling, "No comment." The rain rattled against the windows, each drop like a drumbeat of dread. Caleb adjusted his coat, his gaze locked on Lila with the weight of a warning. Lila whispered, "He wants me scared." Sam muttered, "Then don't give him the gift." Back in court, Sam delivered a motion to compel, his voice thunderous. "The defense demands full disclosure of chain of custody logs." Victor sneered, "Fishing expedition." Judge Walsh's tone was ice. "Mr. Brandt, if they exist, they will be produced." The gallery hummed with whispers, reporters leaning forward. Lila whispered, "Hell, bury it deeper." Sam muttered, "Not if we corner him." Owen Pike shifted in the jury box, guilt flickering across his face. Tessa tapped her pen against the table, eyes locked on Caleb in the gallery. Caleb smirked faintly, a wolf waiting. Mara Keene bowed her head, shoulders trembling. Judge Walsh struck her gavel. "This court will recess until compliance." Lila's heart pounded like a drum, victory close enough to touch, but poisoned by doubt. The stairwell was a cage of echoes. Lila descended with Sam, voice hushed but fierce. "We have to break him," Sam said. "Hell crack when eyes turn." Caleb appeared below, leaning casually, saying, "Looking for me?" Lila froze, fury biting through fear. Caleb stepped closer, water dripping from his coat, and said, "Some truths rot better unseen." Sam blocked his path, growling, "Step back." Caleb smirked, whispering, "You can't prove what you can't find." Lila spat, "Then I'll drag it from you." His smirk lingered before he vanished into shadow. Elise appeared above, watching, shame in her eyes. Tessa's voice echoed from the landing, recorder red light glowing. This stairwell just became evidence. Lila's fists clenched, knowing the war had left whispers and entered open fire. Evening settled with thunder in the distance. On the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed like bees. Victor Brandt raised his voice. "The prosecution will not be intimidated by delay." Flashes blinded Lila as microphones surged toward her. She said, "They're hiding the truth." The crowd roared, questions striking like hail. Sam held her arm, murmuring, "Every word is fire, choose carefully." Elise stood at the door, torn between loyalty and guilt. Caleb lingered across the street under a lamppost, gaze locked, daring her to speak his name. Tessa shouted, "Is Voss behind the missing file?" Silence froze the crowd, every eye waiting. Lila lifted her chin, rain dripping from her hair, and said, "Tomorrow, the truth is mine." The storm above cracked lightning, echoing her vow. The courtroom thundered with silence as Judge Walsh called for closing arguments. Sam Kincaid rose, his voice steady as stone. "The state buried evidence, not my client." He walked slow before the jury, eyes cutting each of them in turn. Lila Hart sat rigid, nails biting into her palms, heart hammering against ribs. Sam said, "They planted doubt while hiding truth." Victor Brandt rose quickly, voice sharp. "Speculation and drama will not save the guilty." The jury leaned forward, trapped between fire and ice. Owen Pike shifted, sweat darkening his collar as his conscience twisted. Elise Hart's eyes glistened with regret from the gallery. Tessa scribbled so hard the ink smeared across the page. Caleb Voss leaned back in shadows, smirk carved into his face like stone. Judge Walsh's gavel struck once, steel echo cutting the air, and she said, "This is the moment of reckoning." Sam's closing carved through the air like fire on dry timber. He said, "You heard witnesses falter, you saw chains of custody vanish, you felt the tremors of corruption." Lila's pulse mirrored every word, defiance heating her veins. Sam slammed his hand on the table. "This is not justice, it is sabotage." The jury flinched at the sound. Owen Pike whispered under his breath, "What if she's right?" Victor rose, voice like velvet over steel. "My learned colleague offers theater, but no truth." The jurors glanced between them, weighing fire against calm. Tessa murmured into her recorder, "The scales tremble tonight." Caleb smirked, eyes gleaming like predator's light. Elise covered her mouth, shame trembling across her frame. Judge Walsh's eyes narrowed, hammering order with her gaze alone. Victor's closing unfurled with the charm of a wolf cloaked in silk. He said, "The defense wants you distracted, but facts are stubborn things." He paced with rehearsed grace, smile curving like a blade. Lila muttered, "He paints Liza's law." Sam whispered back, "And jurors love paintings." Victor leaned toward the box, his voice velvet. She had motive, opportunity, and desperation. The jury froze, absorbing his venom. Owen Pike gripped the rail, heart pounding, guilt dragging him under. Elise shut her eyes, refusing to look at her sister. Caleb's smirk widened, feeding on the tension. Tessa whispered, "He plays them like a violin." Lila's throat burned with rage, but her eyes stayed locked on the jurors. Judge Walsh tapped her gavel once, slicing the silence in two. The judge's instructions echoed like scripture as she said, "You must weigh only the evidence, not rumor." Lila whispered, "Then we are dead." Sam replied, "No, we gave them doubt, and doubt saves lives." The jurors filed out, silence following like a funeral march. Owen Pike's stare lingered on Lila, guilt tattooed across his face. Elise turned away, tears sliding down her cheek. Caleb lit a cigarette outside the window, smoke curling like triumph. Tessa leaned against the rail, whispering into her mic, "The room waits to exhale." Victor buttoned his suit with calm arrogance, whispering, "It's done." Lila closed her eyes, hearing only the storm beyond the windows. Sam squeezed her hand once, saying, "Breathe, it isn't over." The courthouse drowned in stormlight as the jury vanished into chambers. Lila stood on trembling legs, whispering, "What if they choose silence over truth?" Sam gripped her shoulders, saying, "Then we fight again." Victor approached, his smile poisonous. He said, "Enjoy your last night of freedom." Lila's jaw tightened, eyes like fire. Elise whispered, "I'm sorry," but the words barely carried. Tessa's voice cut the air. "Will you survive the verdict?" Lila turned, eyes blazing, and said, "I don't need survival, I need justice." Caleb lingered by the exit, watching with predator calm, smoke clinging to his coat. Judge Walsh slammed her gavel, announcing recess until verdict. The storm outside cracked lightning across the sky, as if the heavens themselves would decide what truth was worth. The jury filed back into the courtroom, every step echoing like a funeral march. Lila Hart sat frozen, her breath shallow, eyes burning holes into Owen Pike. Judge Walsh said, "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson rose, voice cracking, "You have." Sam Kincaid gripped the table, his knuckles pale, whispering, "Hold steady." Victor Brandt smiled faintly, his confidence cutting through the silence. Elise Hart trembled in the gallery, whispering, Please no go. Caleb Voss leaned forward from the shadows, cigarette scent clinging to his coat. Tessa Monroe whispered into her recorder, "History in the making." Thorperson's voice shook as they read, "On the charge of obstruction, guilty." Gasps shattered the air. Lila whispered, "Not me," her voice breaking like glass. Judge Walsh's gavel cracked, sealing the verdict with thunder. Lila's breath stuttered as chains of whispers filled the room. Sam said, "We appeal. This isn't over." Lila whispered, "But the lie won." Victor Brandt stood tall, voice smooth, justice served. The jury shifted uneasily, Owen Pike burying his face in his hands. Elise wept softly, guilt strangling her words. Mara Kino looked down, shame painted on her face. Caleb Voss rose slowly, smirk fading into cold triumph. Tessa whispered into her mic, "The room bleeds disbelief." Judge Walsh said, "Order must be maintained." Lila clenched her fists, whispering, "I will not vanish." Sam leaned closer, whispering, "We burn the path until truth breaks through." Her heart pounded with fury and fear, her soul refusing to bow to a corrupted verdict. Outside, the storm had broken into heavy rain, flooding the courthouse steps with flashing cameras. Reporters shouted questions, voices colliding like thunder. Lila lifted her chin, water dripping down her cheeks like tears she would not shed. Sam shielded her, muttering, "They'll twist every word." Victor Brandt emerged under a black umbrella, smiling into microphones, declaring, "The system prevailed." Elise stood frozen in the doorway, guilt dragging her posture low. Caleb Voss lingered across the street, watching from under a lamppost, his eyes sharp as knives. Tessa pushed forward, recorder glowing red, asking, "Do you still claim innocence?" Lila's voice cut through the storm, "Truth doesn't vanish in rain." Cameras exploded in flashes, capturing her defiance like fire against the night. In the dim corridor, Lila pressed her palms against the cold wall, whispering, "They think they won." Sam stood close, saying, "Verdicts bend, truth doesn't." Elise approached, tears streaking her cheeks, whispering, "I betrayed you." Lila's voice cracked, "You chose fear." Mara Keen appeared, voice trembling, "I can testify, it wasn't her." Sam said, "Then you sign it, under oath." Caleb stepped from the shadows, cigarette smoke curling around him. He smirked, "Careful, truth cuts both ways." Lila turned, fire in her eyes, whispering, "I bleed if I must." Tessa captured every word, her recorder's red light steady as a heartbeat. The storm outside echoed down the corridor, thunder clashing with defiance. Night draped the city in storm-soaked silence as Lila walked into the streetlight glow, press fading behind her. She whispered, "They stole evidence, but not my voice." Sam walked at her side, saying, "We start again tomorrow." Elise lingered on the steps, weeping into her hands. Mara Keen followed with resolve hardening her face. Caleb Voss vanished into an alley, cigarette ember fading like a predator, retreating to hunt again. Victor Brandt's laughter echoed faintly as he entered a waiting car. Tessa's recorder clicked off, her last words whispered, "The truth bleeds tomorrow." Lila raised her chin against the rain, whispering, "Justice does not die in darkness." Lightning split the sky, illuminating her silhouette, a figure unbroken by verdicts or lies.